Okay. I'm making you the
Perfect.
host. Hello, I'm Travis Vengroff, Fool and Scholar Productions sound designer, and I have no formal education in audio engineering. I've been sort of DIY and School of Hard Knocks.
Same for me, really. I grew up running live sound for music in a bunch of different settings, but never anything with sound design. So I've really been self-taught. I'm Dane Leonardson, by the way. I forgot that part. Um, but yeah, I'm excited to dig into some of the finer details with Finnur because he's come in with a lot of knowledge, and so we're ready to soak that up. I'm super excited.
Nice. My name is Finnur Nielsen. I'm currently interning with you fine people over at Fool and Scholar. And I'm currently in the last year of my bachelor's degree in media and sonic communication. That's the formal name of it, but it recently changed the name to sound design. But yeah, it covers all sorts of aspects within the field of audio, everything from sound design to video games and movies, podcasts, as well as the more formal stuff like audio physics and how generally we perceive sound. But yeah, I have a background in music. That's where I started. But more recently, I've been actually working in podcasts and audio drama for the past 4 years now, I think. So that's where I come from.
You've been working with us for like 2 months.
Yeah, already. It's been going pretty fast.
So we had a discussion. We were trying to figure some stuff out, and then LUFS or LUFS, LUFFS, came up, and I realized that I don't know enough. And the question was posed to Dane, and Dane also said the same. So as part of your training, you're schooling us on something that we have no experience in, as we are happy to share information and learn.
Yeah, I'm excited to get into it. I mean, I'm not really excellent at this either, but I've had some classes that have taught this, and this is generally the info I know, and trying to convey it as good as I can. But yeah, I mean, I hope you guys learn something at least. That would be excellent if I manage to do that. I'll share my screen. Oh, wait. There we go. And I'm gonna... There we go. Can you guys see that?
We see you. I don't see it.
Oh, you can see the screen.
Oh, no, I do.
Can
No,
you...
I do.
Now you can see it.
Perfect.
All right. So, what's the deal with LUFS? All right, let's just get into it. Just start off by what does it actually mean? So LUFS is an abbreviation of loudness units relative to full scale. And what does that mean? So here's some basic terminology. This is a really simplified explanation of what is actually being calculated inside of a LUFS meter. But so our first bit is loudness units, which is determined by calculating decibel, sound pressure level, plus time or the duration of a sound, plus phon, which I'll get into later, but is more commonly referred to as K weighing. And then we have full scale, which represents the threshold to which you can push in a digital audio system. It's also commonly used or referred to as headroom. And when we use full scale, we measure something called decibels full scale, which indicates the limit of your digital audio system. And it's usually set at 0 decibel when you're working in digital audio. And everything above that starts clipping because you're pushing your system to the limit. And yeah, these things are just here to assure that you have a pleasant listening experience without pushing your system to its limits, but you're still perceiving the audio as somewhat loud.
And then if it hits 0, the clipping basically is the like distortion of sound. Is that accurate?
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's when you push your system to the point where it can't really decode, or your amplitude goes higher than what your digital system can represent. So it's usually supplemented with artifacts like clipping and stuff like that, because it can't really it's not formulate, but it can't really represent what that audio sounds like through a digital system. But physical audio is something else. I'll get into that. I'll just like to start out by saying what LUFS aren't. LUFS are not the same as decibels, because I've seen quite a few people actually using the words interchangeably, LUFS, decibels, and everything. But decibels refer to an immediate measurement of an audio source's amplitude and intensity, which is also known as SPL, sound pressure level. I should also mention decibels are logarithmic, which means that plus 10 dB is not just 10% louder, it's actually 10 times louder than the previous 10 decibels. And while both are used to measure audio levels, decibels look at the more immediate physical intensity of an audio source, and LUFS look at the perceived loudness. And the word perceive is actually quite important when you're talking LUFS, because it's all about perception of loudness, and it's all relative to the human ear, or how humans hear. And decibel is a linear concept, while LUFS is all about perception. And why are LUFS important? LUFS actually came as a result of inconsistent audio levels throughout broadcasting. So one moment you're sitting down watching some quiet nature documentary or something, and the next thing you know, some really, really loud commercial trying to sell you car parts comes on, and it can be quite disrupting, but it's also an attempt to mitigate the effects of the loudness war, for example, where people just try to push the limit of music and everything to the max. And as a result of that, we have lost a lot of dynamic range in music, and people got listening fatigue, and as well as some quite damaging or hearing damage. So as a result, the European Broadcasting Agency, European Broadcasting Union, sorry, wanted to introduce some guidelines to make sure that production companies actually adhere to it. This is where we hear, usually when you're talking LUFS or reading up on LUFS, you hear about EBU R128. It's also more formally known as ITU-R BS 7070. Yeah, the European Broadcasting Union actually set a set of rules or specifications for audio, which is under this umbrella EBU R128.
And that's the rule? That's the name of the rule?
Yeah, that's the
Okay.
that's the loudness standard they set for broadcasters in Europe, at least, and more have adopted it, and you see it a lot in digital audio as well, from everything from streaming and theaters and podcasts and everything. But yeah, the concept is ensuring audio levels that would comply with how humans perceive loudness, and also to mitigate the ever-growing competition of seeing who has the loudest mix. And thanks to this, we got LUFS, LUFS, and they're just there to ensure that audiences get consistent listening levels, improved audio quality, and generally an environment that isn't as damaging to your ears when you're sitting down and listening. And beyond broadcasting, LUFS are used in all sorts of places in the entertainment field, but we can also use this as audio engineers, because when we know the considerations that are made regarding LUFS calculations will have an easier time making consistent masters, but also maintaining our dynamic range. And everyone has a good time. But I'm not sure if you have you ever seen the word LKFS used instead of LUFS?
Not that I remember, I might have seen it, but I just sort of like glaze over and keep going to the next word.
Yeah.
I
How
have
about?
not.
Yeah. Okay. Usually when on forums and everything, I think it's more on the side of like music production. I see this, but also some podcasting groups I'm in, they tend to use LKFS instead of LUFS, but they're exactly the same. LUFS is a term coined by the European Broadcasting Union, EBU. It means loudness units full scale, while LKFS is mostly used in North America by the North American Broadcasting Corporation, which just means loudness K weight full scale. But both actually represent the exact same thing, loudness measured relative to full scale K weighted. Now, K weight, that's a word I've been saying a lot here. So the K weight is actually based on the Fletcher-Munson curve, but with a slight boosted shelf around the 2 kilohertz mark. And the Fletcher-Munson curve is usually referred to as A weight. So
Wait,
K
the
weight
2 or the 20?
The 2000 hertz mark.
Okay.
Or 2 kilohertz. Yeah. So K weight is just an A weight with a boost on the 2000 hertz scale. Where was I? Oh, yeah. And this is an approximation of how a human ear, on average, perceives loudness. But it's important to remember that not all ears hear the same, and some have different sensitivities to other frequencies and everything. So the model isn't one-to-one on how every ear works, but it's the closest average we have, and that's what they used for this model. So the curve we have here is called the equal loudness contours, and I wanted to explain a bit about that. So it consists of 3 main parts. You have your decibel sound pressure level and your frequency range, but then we have this term called a fawn, and all a fawn is basically how the same signal can be perceived as equally loud depending on where it is on the Fletcher-Munson curve. And all a fawn is actually just, it's considered a unit of loudness. So am I still making somewhat sense here, or?
So we're using the unit of decibels within a frequency range to determine the fawn, basically, of that range. Is that accurate?
Yeah. So when you're at different places at the frequency spectrum, humans usually hear from around, I think it's 80 hertz up to around 16, 17,000 hertz. So it's the range of human hearing. And a fawn is just a single sine wave, just a single piece of frequency placed at different ends of the decibel levels.
Okay. And then with beyond human perception, like let's say you recorded some dolphin noises and you're able to actually capture the frequencies with a specialized microphone. I guess beyond the like 15K, it seems to just go dotted line up because we can't perceive it.
Yeah, that's just estimated because you can't really hear that, or the human ear doesn't perceive that noise or those frequencies.
Okay, I'm understanding then.
Yeah. So it's just used to determine how single sine wave, where we have our threshold. This is actually the baseline. So our threshold starts with 0 decibel in physical audio, 0 decibel sine wave at around 1,000 hertz. I'll show you some examples later if this is a bit confusing, but I do. And so, for instance, if we have a sine wave at 100 hertz, then you can see we actually have to increase the volume to around 25 decibels or so to match the loudness of how we perceive a 1 kilohertz sine wave to be. And the same goes for around 3 kilohertz, but as the frequencies go higher, the human ear perceives them as louder as well, and they're more sensitive to that. So we actually decrease the Fawn value when we come to that piece. And I actually have something in Pro Tools for you guys. I hope you can actually hear it.
Okay, so with the last part you just said, it's
Yeah.
finally starting to click for me. So
Yeah.
sorry, I have my camera stopped there. It's because I'm looking at my phone and I don't want to be all the way zoomed in on my forehead.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I'm like looking at my phone, So
Yeah.
Oh, no problem.
All good. So if you look to my, can you see my Pro Tools session right now, right?
I see it. I don't hear it yet, but I'm excited to.
Yeah, okay. I have it muted for a reason. You'll hear it.
Oh, no.
But you can see I have 3 tracks here. One is labeled 100 hertz, one is 1 kilohertz, and one is 3 kilohertz, or 1,000 and 3,000. And they're all equally negative 20 decibels in digital, right? So if we, and I also have this limiter here, which is set to measure LUFS as well. And I have the baseline set to negative 16 LUFS.
We will not die.
So no, you shouldn't die, hopefully. And I actually don't know if Zoom normalizes the audio, so it might be that they actually lower the higher frequencies in order to comply with a consistent LUFS level. So I don't know if you'll hear the difference, but I'll show you how the meter perceives it as differently. And this is also just to show the example that the intensity of the sound is actually the same. It's measured at the same decibel level, but the LUFS are different. So here we have 100 hertz. Do you hear that?
Yeah, I heard at the beginning, and then it just then it zooms like this is noise. But yeah, I as a tone. Oh wow.
Okay. All right. So this is 100 hertz, and you can see it quite consistently. Yeah, that's when I messed up and put the other tone on, but it stayed consistently at 16. Now, if we go up to 1,000, let's just reset this.
That's a higher frequency.
That's a higher frequency. And you can see the loops actually go up. And here we have 3,000. But they're all equally loud in decibels, but they are perceived much louder by your ear. But I haven't changed anything about them. They're all the exact same volume, but they're perceived as louder. And that's what we calculate with loops as well, and we use the Fawn value. So it's just to see how does the ear react to a frequency of this range, a frequency of this range. And the sine wave is just the purest tone you can get. It's a single band on the frequency spectrum. While music and dialogue and sound effects isn't just one single range of frequencies, it's a whole spectrum and everything is in play all the time. But you have like more high frequency material in some stuff and more low frequency material in some other stuff. So when we know this stuff, we can actually make better choices as well when we're mixing and hit the loops easier as well. And so it's just a tool maybe to help.
And to clarify, one differentiator, if you have an instrument that's playing higher or lower notes, it's not changing the frequency. It would be a different instrument, or a different string perhaps might have a higher frequency, but not like, I guess if you're playing like one violin, it's not gonna, by hitting a higher note on the string, it still stays the same frequency range because it's one string.
Yeah, kinda.
Generally.
generally, but you have so much else going on when you're for instance playing the violin, because you have the room reverbs and everything coming in, and so even though it sounds as if it's a consistent tone, you have a lot of other stuff like coming into play, like is the room introducing a deeper reverb and everything. And so but yeah, generally you have your frequency material inside of your audio signal, and depending on if you're playing the bass or if you're playing the violin or something, you introduce like more higher frequency stuff, and that actually weighs more inside your LUFS meter than the lower frequency stuff, because it isn't perceived as louder.
So like a voice for dialogue, that's the thing we cut the most of
Yeah,
in audio drum and audio fiction and audiobooks. Uh, a voice, even if the voice went higher, like ah, or lower, that wouldn't affect the frequency range as much. Like weighted, that would not be like a big deal of changing it, because you'd still have the same instrument, the voice. It would not affect the loops as much, or it would have a higher. It would affect it in a big way.
I'll actually come into that a bit
Okay,
here
I'll be quiet.
because no, no, but excellent questions. So yeah, this is a bit blurry image you have here, but this is like on the bottom of the meter we had three columns they were measuring, and these are just or the SM and I. It's integrated, it's short term, and then momentary, and those are like the units of time that we measure when we use LUFS as well. Because in the LUFS calculation, you also have this overtime aspect. So you have, I'll get into it now. So first you have integrated. It's the entire audio file. So from start to finish, how large is the range in frequency and volume and everything from start to finish of the audio track. So that's integrated, and that's usually what streaming service and everything look at. It's the integrated LUFS level. So do you have a consistent piece of audio that's around minus 16 LUFS? But then we also have short term, which is measured at about 3 seconds. So this gives insight into more relevant and active dynamics in your mix as well. And then you have momentary, which is about 4 milliseconds, give or take. Some metering tools have it a little bit longer, some have a little bit shorter maybe, but on average it's around 4 milliseconds. And this is just something we can use in our toolbox as audio people when we're like measuring dynamics, and we're just making sure we're not exceeding the loudness targets that different platforms have. But why do we also measure time? It's really important to consider actually, because short bursts of loudness are perceived as louder when they suddenly appear and disappear faster, which is why, for example, jump scares are so incredibly effective at giving you a fright, even though the signal itself isn't louder per se than the integrated loudness of the track. Its placement among lower audio sources and more quieter sources make it so it's perceived as much louder. And not to get way too anatomical with this, but a really quick overview of what actually happens, why it's important to consider how fast the volume changes are. Because the human ear can self-regulate through something called acoustic reflex, which is in the middle ear. It can actually contract and actually lower the overall volume around you with around 15 to 20 decibels. But it's not instant, it's regulated over time. So the muscles don't contract immediately, they slowly contract, or in a matter of seconds, not milliseconds. So short bursts intermingled with quiet sound sources are perceived as much louder. I think it's I was at this lecture. It was actually he's a doctor, but he works for Genelec now, I think. And he actually came with some reasons why this might be. I think it's from when humans were walking on the savannas and stuff like that, and you needed to be aware of sudden noises around you. So you have this reaction when a sudden burst of noise actually comes to your ears and everything. So it it can also issue a response, but humans are generally quite aware of loud noises suddenly and regulate over time to lower the overall volume and to protect your ears as well. But yeah, that was way too anatomical. But it didn't really answer your question. But when you have like a lot of high frequency material for a long time, your overall LUFS, your integrated LUFS, they rise. But you can also have a violin and you change between playing low, playing high, and everything. But maybe yours, I don't know what the frequency spectrum of a violin is exactly. But generally, the more high frequency content you introduce, the higher your LUFS are going to be registered as.
Yeah. Can I interject something there?
Yeah.
I use a violin VST called Joshua Bell. And I noticed that a lot of times when I start to go on the higher end of things, I do have to automate my volume down. Um, yeah, and sometimes I'll make a separate track just for the high bits so that I can have more control over it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That makes a lot of
And
sense.
yeah, and you don't necessarily actually have a higher volume of violin, even though it sounds like it. But that's just because it's perceived, and that was what I was really trying to show with my example inside my Pro Tools session, that they're all equally high in volume, but they sound much louder when you come to the higher end stuff than with your low end.
The difference from 11 to 16, given that we're also on Spotify and Apple, what would you advise as a target?
I'll get into that.
Okay, great. I'm just like, this is stuff. This is very interesting. Okay.
Yeah, and I hope I'm still making somewhat sense, and there will be a quiz at the end of this, so I hope you've been taking notes. So no, all right. So yeah, different streaming platforms have different LUFS targets that they want. The most popular streaming services, like Amazon, Spotify, Tidal, and YouTube, they have a loudness target at minus 14 LUFS, while Apple Music, as well as the recommended loudness for music streaming and stuff like that by the Audio Engineering Society, is minus 16. I'm not really sure what standards Realm have for their distribution, but I know for a fact that the Fable and Folly network, which I've worked with in the past, they ask their creators to master to minus 16 and then 1 decibel true peak. And why do we master to 16 instead of 14? There's a lot to gain actually, because all of the streaming services, they normalize their audio to hit their target loudness, but they only decrease the volume. They don't uh, decrease. What's the opposite of decrease? Increase.
Increase.
They don't increase the volume, but they always lower the volume to match their target loudness, and that's called a loudness penalty. So the way they do that is they just throw a brick wall limiter on it and just force the audio down in volume. So you lose a lot of dynamic range, and by sticking to minus 16 instead, so we don't have to worry about them pushing the volume down, we maintain dynamic range, and it also ensures like the immersive experience we're going for with low whispers to loud explosions and everything, because we maintain a more consistent LUFS level at a lower threshold.
I
So
have a
there's
terrible question. Does Patreon embedded normalize our tracks?
that's a good question. I actually don't know.
I have to find that out. I
Yeah.
may have a terrible problem that I have to fix. Oh God. Okay, thank you.
Oh, but yeah, generally minus 16 should be fine. A lot of people, when you have like spoken podcasts and stuff like that, they say to master to minus 19, and for broadcasting they want minus 23, which is actually the recommended loudness target by the EBU as well. But their main concern is broadcasters, so TVs and everything. So that's minus 23. But I mean, we know what platforms we're getting listened on, and we know what their levels are set at. So we should just match them as closely as possible. So
And really, could you go back really quickly? I just want to
Yeah.
point out one thing for people who don't know what the little track is. The little clip up top doesn't mean that you, so the top track of the -8 and the -14 on the right, the horizontal bar, those represent a capped out dynamic range where you've hit that peak of distortion, essentially, because you see a flat line and that usually represents distortion.
Distortion, but also the max level to which it's essentially your peaks of audio, yeah. But in Danish we actually call it a sausage because it has like this just perfectly sausage look to it. But you just minimize the dynamic range. You don't necessarily introduce clipping and everything when you do this, but you take the highest volume of your track and your lowest volume of your track, and you actually just compress them together. It's kind of what compression does. A limiter is just a compressor mainly, but just where your threshold is to the max. So you have your brick wall. It's just a roof that your audio can't penetrate. So everything that's above this just gets forced to be lower, so it's closer in range to the lower volume of your track.
This explains a lot, because it's I don't want to say it's a distortion, it's not, but like it's a loss of quality, maybe that is eventually perceivable at some end. And I think I'm understanding a lot more a loss of quality that may have occurred to some of our stuff, and why, over the last like 8 years, not necessarily the last 3, but the last 8. So this is exciting for me as something that I can do to look at.
Yeah, this is awesome. It takes a lot for me to like buy into a system because a lot of times they end up being more tedious than useful to me. But like obviously this is so applicable and useful. So yeah, thank you very much for
That's
explaining
also
it.
what I want to try to convey, that it's a really good thing to know, and it does dictate a lot of like how listeners hear your final product, even though you want it to or not. It's just how it works, because Spotify has a LUFS level they set as their target. Apple Music, Apple Podcasts have a target they set, and if you like it or not, it will be forced to match that loudness if you go above
Yeah.
that. But generally,
The
if you're
only way to
a bit
truly
lower,
control your mix is to comply with that. Exactly. Yeah.
and that's the most like true to form way of like how you want your audio to be heard, how you heard it when you were mixing it and everything. That's just how your audio is gonna be heard at the other end as well. And so we have, it's called loudness penalty. There's a site you can also check for loudness penalty, but that's mostly for music producers who really want to push their mix. And you'll also hear a lot of, it's not nice to say amateurs, but if you're on music production forums and everything, and people discuss mixing and everything, they always, yeah, I'm so tired of hearing about LUFS. LUFS don't matter, blah blah blah. And I mean, they do matter, but you don't have to adhere to it. But it just makes a worse product in the other side of the chain. So I don't know. It's good to know, I think.
Yes, this is awesome.
So back where we started, what's the deal with LUFS? So just running off here, it came as a result of people trying to be as loud as possible. The European Broadcasting Union wanted more consistent audio. LUFS take into consideration how humans perceive loudness. And we should use LUFS when we're creating audio to ensure healthier listening, also avoiding loudness penalties and also avoiding a loss of dynamics in the process. And lastly, it's just one part of the equation when we're creating a final product. So it's really great to know, but you shouldn't let it dictate your entire life either. I mean, you should take it to consideration when you're making certain choices, but you don't have to think about it every single second while you're sound designing or mixing and everything. LUFS really come into play at the very last stage when you're mastering, when you're ready to push the product out. That's when it really counts. But you can also consider how much high frequency content your product includes and everything, and knowing that, you'll most likely be able to conclude that, oh, maybe my production will be much higher in LUFS than it probably should have been because I have this whistling wind and this rustling that. And so that's mainly how it's done. But yeah, don't let it dictate your life, but it's really, really good to know, I think. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk.
That was fantastic,
Bravo.
and thank you.
Yes, thank you for teaching us.
Nice. I hope you learned something.
I do have a repeat question from earlier. So if I have a
Oh.
voice, typically if I have like, let's say James, that's my middle name. So James is an actor, James is recording. We've got like an hour of James talking in audiobook form. James has a couple of different voices in this track. Would we have to do separate EQ passes on the different voices to try and keep a same range on a voice? Or is it like only when it really gets to more extreme stuff like singing?
Nah, I wouldn't say necessarily. There's this it's actually it's a loudness meter called Youlean, Youlean, which is it's actually free. I'd recommend getting it, but it actually has a dialogue detector as well, because humans have a certain range when speaking. You can sing higher or lower. Some people speak a bit lower, but you have a general range, and those fall quite nicely in the acceptable range of like how of perceived loudness. But no, generally it's not as important. It's the whole calculated sum of everything. So you have a lot of speech through a certain set of time, and you have this frequency material, but it's also how loud it is in the mix. So you can't really change much about, I mean, the human voice should be represented as cleanly and clearly as possible. So I wouldn't necessarily go in and mess with EQing the voice to mitigate some fawns here and there. Instead, I'd maybe take a look at maybe lowering some ambience here and there.
Okay.
I mean, the changes aren't really that drastic in order to affect it quite severely. I think the main thing that really, really impacts your LUFS is how loud it is. I mean, the here I'm mostly talking about the dBs you're pushing, because because when you're, I mean, I could say they weigh the most when calculating this stuff, but the collective, I don't know, the collective outcome of frequency content as compared to the amount of volume you push is a bit not as important. I mean, you get a lot more mileage out of maybe trying to balance your volume levels, and then you can start messing with like frequency content and everything if it's really, really that bad, but it really shouldn't be.
And a decent LUF to target overall for the, I think it said integrated, was the entirety from beginning to end. A target should be -16, -14, -28.
-16 would be
Okay.
fine.
Minus 16 and then a -1.
Yeah, decibel true peak. Yeah.
Okay. We already that's our true peak already. We definitely need to work on the other end of things now, I'm
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah, but generally the thing I consider the most is just the sheer amount of stuff I'm trying. All right, let's put it this way. You have a podcast with a host and a guest maybe, and it's just those two people talking. You shouldn't really go in and mess with like EQing their voices to make room for other stuff and everything, because it's just two people speaking and it should stay that way. So you should just maybe go in and level check the levels, and then you should be fine actually. So
Okay. No, I get
yeah,
it. I was trying to understand the overall picture, and I can now fit it in my head, and I think
yeah.
other people can understand it as well. And I'm really appreciative of you putting this presentation together. It's awesome.
Glad you like it.
I'm sure there's even more specific rules when you get into like audio drama as well, right? As far as like general decibel levels you want to hit for certain things, like your vocals versus your top end for your sound effects, etc.
Yeah, I mean, the closest thing I can think to audio dramas is maybe looking at how they mix movies and everything, but when you're into motion picture and everything, it's a whole other beast, and there's so much going on there as opposed to audio fiction. So that's like the closest thing I can think of. But you don't watch movies on Spotify and everything with your AirPods in your ears and stuff like that. So,
Right. And I have a
but
hard time hearing all of the dialogue in movies sometimes with how they
Because they're
mix
all
it.
yeah, but yeah, that's a whole other beast to tackle.
Right.
But but yeah, I mean, especially when we have audio dramas, dialogue is king. So everything should make room for the dialogue. So you shouldn't
absolutely.
lessen your dialogue in order to make room for some really sick ambience you made or something like that. So
Right.
yeah,
It's funny.
but
We did an entire scene,
Yeah.
so much work, and then we
I
hit it behind the
generally
helmet.
yeah. But yeah, it's just stuff to consider and
CB.
just sorry, what?
A reception
Oh, I
issue.
was just saying, generally what I've been doing.
Yeah, reception.
Oh no, I think we're losing him.
Listening. But I'll cut the recording here. Thank you again, Finnur, for putting this together. And yeah, we'll get this up pretty soon.
Problem.
Have a great
I
one. You could follow our
useful.
stuff on anywhere you find audio, Fool and Scholar. Finnur, is there any special way to find you?
Not yet.
But soon.
Maybe soon. Yes, we'll see.
Thank you again.